Hello and welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 29. Joining me today is the author of two mystery thriller novels, A Little Bird Told Me and All Your Little Lies. Hello, Marianne Holmes.
Hi, Charlie. How are you?
I'm good. Yes, I'm good. How are you?
Yes, not too bad. Friday afternoon, so that's great.
You have travelled as a child and you grew up in various different countries. Your father was in the RAF. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I was actually born in Cyprus and lived there until I was 2 before coming back to the UK. And then we moved around. I spent some time in Germany and the Middle East and Belgium. And I went to boarding school from the age of 11 so that I wasn't bouncing around between schools too much.
And before you became an author, you had a career in marketing. Has that helped you with your books?
I think having a career before becoming an author did help me because it gave me some perspective to what I was doing, and having had the experience of working in marketing and trying to present things for different audience, it did help me think about the way I was trying to communicate in the books. I'm not sure there's a direct correlation between marketing and actually writing the stories, but I do think there's something there about trying to get a message across or trying to convey a feeling for specific people.
Well, slightly on marketing, I suppose. It's kind of related. Your publication with Agora Books started with a tweet. Can you tell us about that?
I had joined Twitter after being longlisted for the Bath Novel Award and has then spent a few months editing and submitting the manuscript. And then out of the blue, I got a tweet from Agora Books asking for the first 3 chapters, which was amazing. So I sent it off. And then a few months later, I hadn't heard anything. And I was just thinking about maybe putting the book away. And sort of as a last minute thing, I got in touch. And Sam then read the chapters and came back and asked for the full manuscript. So it actually is quite a mystery in itself how that tweet happened, because it wasn't Sam who sent it and we're not really sure who it was.
Worth a short story in itself, maybe.
Yeah.
Brief summaries of the 2 books are incoming now. A Little Bird Told Me is about young Robin, who has grown up with the story of a hurricane bringing her brother Kit and their mum to the place that Matthew lived. Mum often has women to stay over, and this makes the town uncomfortable for the family. In the second narrative thread, a now grown-up Robin is sorting through what she's since learned about her family, and she and Kit return to the town that doesn't want them back to find out what happened to their mother and try to work through the role of the man in the cowboy hat who is in jail. They know who he is, but you as the reader are yet to find out. And All Your Little Lies follows Annie, who can't make sense of people. One evening, her colleague Paul has embarrassed her, and, knowing where he keeps his keys, and she's very drunk, she goes into his flat to look around and make herself feel better about the situation. What she doesn't realise until later is that in doing this, she was the last person to have seen a teenage girl before the girl disappeared. The book looks at the effects of trauma on a person's development and how views of the world can be skewed. Marianne, do you plan your books?
I didn't plan A Little Bird Told Me at all. And as a result of that, I had to do quite a lot of structural edits and move a lot of things around, and it was quite time consuming. So for All Your Little Lies, I did do some planning and tried to lay out the plot by chapter and then down to scene. And that worked a lot better in terms of the edits I needed to do afterwards.
Yeah, because you do have the 2 narratives dipping in and out of the different years. And it's quite a lot to keep track of just as a reader, I think, particularly in A Little Bird Told Me.
Yeah, certainly in A Little Bird Told Me. It didn't always make sense for the things to happen consecutively in each timeline. So that was quite a challenge to make sure that every time it dropped back to the childhood timeline, there was something relevant to what was going on for the adult Robin. So yes, it was quite complicated. It was my first book, and I hope I've learned how to keep track of everything a little bit better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've said what I had, but I don't mean it was a bad thing. I mean, it's quite good. It makes you attentive to the text, I think, when you're reading. And it's kind of fun, it's a fun experience.
It was quite fun writing it out of sequence and just picking the scenes that were fun to write and then going back and filling in. But yes, it wouldn't suit everyone.
Well, you have a reading picked out for us from the book.
I do. I'm going to read a very short prologue and then a short section a little further on. Prologue. They say I'll never find her. Kit says it doesn't matter because we still have each other, but not a day goes by when I don't long for the truth. I feel her absence aching and flowing through the gaps in our story where the pieces don't mesh. I see her presence in the spatter of freckles on Kit's nose and the straight curtain of hair I can't keep out of my eyes. They say no one knows where she is. What they really mean is they couldn't find her. I know that's true because I've read the news reports, but there is one person who knows where she is. Family is blood and pain, he said, and one day I will hunt you down and teach you the meaning of that. His breath was bitter with the smell of cigarettes, his eyes spilling sparks of fury, and the scar on his cheek stretched and twisted as he spoke. Or it might have. I read about that too, long after Matthew took us far away from here. I will hunt you down, he said, and I know he will. If I'm ever going to find her, this is my last chance. But if I start looking, he'll come looking for us. I can't help that. There's something I need to put right. Besides, if you were one half evil, wouldn't you want to know about the other half? In the next section, Robin and her brother Kit have returned to their childhood home after 12 years away. Inside the house, we set our cases down by the meter cupboard. It feels strange and familiar at the same time, and I charge around, forgetful of my tiredness, switching on all the lights. The bare bulbs leave the rooms raw and overexposed and throw stark shadows from the packing boxes that have been abandoned by the doors, labels still attached. I pause in the lounge where Matthew stored all his business archives after he closed his offices in town, and let my toes drop into the indents in the carpet where his filing cabinet stood. Nothing is quite how it was. I couldn't let it go, Matthew'd said, and I couldn't leave it completely empty. Last time we lived in this house, there were 4 of us. When there were only 3, we couldn't stay. Matthew couldn't stay. And now Matthew is on his way again to live the life he put aside to care for us. We didn't know him until we arrived in this town, but he's been our real father in every way since we'd literally crashed into his life. I push the sofas that have been left in the middle of the room back so that they're facing each other as they used to, and sit down on the floor. Where my feet are, there was a sheepskin rug. Kit would hide his toy soldiers in it for ambushes, and they'd get tangled and caught in the fur. Often, one of them would get left behind and forgotten until Mum or Matthew screamed when they stepped on it barefoot. Do you remember? I asked Kit. I know he does. I close my eyes and see the house as it was back then, alive with noise and colour and the smell of the cigarettes Mum hid from Matthew. The floorboards tick softly under me, and I get up, not ready to hear all the stories the house can tell tonight. Kit sees my face and gives me a quick hug. Come on. We take our suitcases upstairs and pull out some linen to make the beds, as though our return is nothing remarkable. Then I patrol the rooms to look in all the cupboards, undecided whether to leave the doors wide, exposing their dark recesses, or to shut it all away. It's just bricks and mortar, I tell myself. It can't hurt us. Kit follows me without comment as I go back downstairs, testing locks and turning lights off and on again until I'm satisfied that we're safe. My head is buzzing from the journey and full of plans. I know I won't sleep tonight, but Kit looks beat. No one can get in, little bird, he says finally, although he waits with me a while, pale and silent. When he goes to his own room, he leaves his door wide open so I can hear his breathing, deep and steady as I sit on the window seat in mine. I look at the glass and a face stares back at me. My heart fills my throat so that I can't shout for help. I blink and recognise my own reflection, pale in the night, eyes wide and my expression blank in the hard light. I wrap the musty curtains tight around me so no one can see me from inside or out.
It's interesting to me, having read the book, and I just read it a few days ago, that you've got Matthew. He's always in the background, and yet hearing you read that, it's brought to life just how much this person who's effectively, I suppose you could say, the fourth most important character in the family, you've detailed him so much. And I suppose I just want to say that there, because I haven't actually got a question about Matthew, which I now feel bad about.
We like Matthew. Matthew's a good guy.
No, he's a fabulous guy. So why the heatwave of 1976?
Well, it was partly because I wanted the atmosphere of all this heat and the joyful side for the children, but the more difficult side for the parents, the oppressive nature of heat. And pragmatically, it was because it was the summer that we moved home from Germany to a small village in Sussex. And so I remember it very well. I remember the garden being full of cracks in the ground because it was so dried out, and the pavements, the tarmac being sticky. And also coming back to the UK, we had a TV for the first time and started watching all these brilliant children's programs and American programs. And so for me, it's just quite a vivid time, and also interesting in terms of the story, the difference between the children's experience of it and the adults.
So despite this being, obviously a particular story, it's quite obviously it's extreme in its conflicts and things, there's a little bit of you in there.
There is, absolutely. I would have been about the same age as Robin and playing the same sorts of games and a similar life on the face of it, in that I wasn't brought up in the place that we lived, and Robin, although she'd lived there most of her life, wasn't born there either. So yes, there is a bit of me.
Mm-hmm. Well, on this subject, a slight note. You've also got the book that Robin is reading, Flambards, by K.M. Peyton, which was 1967. Was this a book you read yourself?
Yes, I loved it. It's a trilogy. There are 3 books. My mum got it out of the library for me, and it's a story about a heron in long skirts who rides ponies and also flies aeroplanes, and I just absolutely loved it.
We don't know if Robin gave her copy back to the library. Did you give yours back?
I'm sure I did. I must have done, definitely.
Good. So we're going to the story proper. This time was when domestic violence was starting to be properly looked at, I suppose you could say. Could you kind of delve into this for us in terms of your research?
It was during that year that the law was changed and recognised domestic violence as an offence. I can't remember the name of the act off the top of my head, but the first women's refuge opened up in Chiswick. So it was quite a big shift in understanding, and I think it would have not been unusual to hear people talk about, oh, it's just a domestic with regard to violence at home, rather than recognising that actually that's not okay and not normal. So really quite a different time.
We know whilst reading the book, it's a few decades prior to our present day. It's still kind of shocking to read about the policeman going, oh, we'll leave it alone, we've got to leave them.
I think it is a long time ago and we have come a long way, but it still goes on, and I think there are still some attitudes that are not perhaps where we'd like them to be. So yes, it was difficult writing the policeman and not making him sound too much like a very old-fashioned TV character with those sorts of attitudes.
Uh-huh. You've got this refusal of adults to tell young children things that actually might help the situation if they told them, which of course is a thing outside of fiction. People don't tell children things that they don't think is appropriate and so on. Was this element of your story inspired by a particular event or story you'd heard?
No, I don't think there was a specific event, but certainly when I was a child, it was very much the case that there were adult things and there were children's things. And I think the norm was to keep worries or difficult stuff away from children. And obviously, to some extent, that's very well intentioned to try and give kids a lovely, worry-free childhood. But as you say, it can store up problems, and it doesn't perhaps help children understand the world around them either, even within their own family or outside.
It's fascinating because the frustration for the reader is like, I want to know the answer to this. Maybe she could give us the answer. But of course you can't, because that wouldn't be realistic to the situation of the child. we should move on to All Your Little Lies. You've got a reading for us there as well.
I have. I'm going to read a scene from early in the book. Annie has seen an image of a girl who's gone missing in her own town and has been wondering whether it's somebody that she might recognise. Annie woke with a dry throat. There was no way she was going to get back to sleep until she'd drunk a lot of water. It took her a few moments to come to properly and shake off the dark wings of the dream that still flapped in her head. Fear twisted in her stomach as she swung her legs out of bed, and she listened hard before removing the wedge that held her bedroom door shut. The familiar ticks and sighs of the house ambushed her anew as she stepped down the stairs and into the kitchen, bracing herself for the bang of the pipes as she ran the water. She left the kitchen light off so the outlines of plants in the garden were visible, but no one outside could see in. The bones of the honeysuckle trembled along the fence under the rain that still fell. The furry catkins of the pussy willow she'd planted the year before jumped in the feeble moonlight that leaked through the racing clouds. Annie refilled her glass a second time, the spray spattering droplets down the front of her dressing gown. The lonely hours before dawn exposed her old nightmares, and sleep was unsafe. She couldn't risk sinking back into those dreams again and being trapped in the wild disorder of images and noise. Instead, she had to sit and nurse the fainter tangle of decades-old memories. Sunshine, wet rocks, shards of glass throwing rainbows on the carpet, and hiding in the footwell of a speeding car with a blanket over her head. They tumbled over themselves, calling for her attention. This morning it seemed that the shadows were more insistent, more nagging, and she fought to control her panic as anguish flooded her mind. She knew there was something wrong now, too, but the details were murky. This was how her brain acted. It tapped into a lifetime of guilt so that she couldn't unravel her latest failure from the first. Annie checked the bolts on the front door reflexively as she passed and picked up the Standard. She climbed back into the hollow she'd left on the sofa last night to read it properly. There was something about that picture of Chloe that had been flickering in and out of her dreams all night, spurring them on again when she thought they might subside. The girl was walking away from the camera. They'd chosen a still when she turned her head to the side, arcing her hair back over her shoulder to reveal her pale face in the direction of her gaze, as if she'd been checking a noise behind her. Annie caught her breath. In her head was the sudden image of another child looking back at her. The thought of her whispered across her mind like so many other images that she couldn't shut out. Now that Annie had seen numerous photographs of Chloe in colour, she didn't need to study this dull imitation of the girl's face. She knew her eyes were blue and the tips of her long hair were lighter than the rest, as if she'd dipped them in a pot of paint. The headlights of the car behind Chloe created a dazzling halo effect, so that her features were blanched and indistinct anyway. It was as if Chloe was already fading away when the image was taken. Annie blinked, the pain behind her eyes playing with her vision. Carefully, she smoothed the paper out on her lap and looked at the whole picture. She'd been so focused on trying to recognise Chloe that she'd concentrated on the face of the girl alone. The curve of Station Parade in the background was lit up by the streetlights as it bent around the small island of grass and up towards the main road. If the camera had panned a little to the left, it would have picked up the alleyway through to Paul's apartment block. Some mornings, Annie would slow her walk to the ticket office, hoping to see him emerge so they could travel on the train together. But it had never happened. She felt a moment of pain as she thought of him joking with the others in the pub after work. Wondered what he'd said about her, how much they'd laughed. She pushed the thought away and concentrated on the image, searching for whatever had triggered this particular night of broken sleep. The headlights of the car behind Chloe obscured its registration plate and left the windscreen a blank, so that the driver was invisible. Annie assumed the police would already have spoken to that driver anyway. And then she knew they hadn't. The glow from the street lights along Station Parade behind was just enough to outline the distinctive shape of the car's near side mirror. It stuck out at an awkward angle from the tangle of masking tape that held it together. She dropped the paper. It had taken her nearly half an hour to wind enough tape around that mirror to keep it in place.
There are a lot of important aspects to this book. What is the defining element of it for you?
That's a really interesting question. I think the book for me is about this one person, Annie's loneliness and her sense of dislocation from society around her, and how much she wants to be a part of it, but because she can't be open, it's very, very hard for her to connect. And there's something about maybe how we look at people and make judgments about them and don't always realize what's going on in the background for them, and how easy it is for somebody who's desperate to make a connection and desperate to be seen to get sucked into the sort of social media and publicity around these events that pull a community together, and the temptation maybe to insert yourself into those events to become part of them, and that one little lie at the beginning that then leads to all of these others, all these errors of judgment.
That was the biggest bit that I took away, I think. And because of the way you wrote it, how you explain and show Annie's state of mind and where she is, where she's coming from. On this idea of the different important aspects, your son's reaction to a missing child also influenced this book. Can you tell us about it?
It did, yes. A local child went missing, and there were posters up and ribbons on our walk to school and on our walk to the parks. And my 6-year-old became very emotionally engaged and was convinced that they knew this person, that they'd seen them, that they just needed to go out and search, and was really, really concerned and followed the story all the way through. And I found that so interesting, that seeing images and hearing bits of the story and hearing little bits about the individual had such a strong impact on them. And that's one of the things that prompted me to think about Annie and all of these other people who respond to police appeals, whether it's for missing people or for other things. But you hear some of the very highly publicised cases, and many aren't, but the police receive thousands of calls. And I was wondering how many of those callers could realistically have seen something or have information. And that started me thinking about the sort of person who might call with that desire to be helpful, but perhaps not with anything specifically useful. And that's really where Annie comes from.
I'm wondering what books you might write further if you explored other people who rung in.
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Well, if you write it, I'm definitely reading it. That would be good.
Fantastic.
Do we have any stats for missing children?
There is a reference to that in the book somewhere. I checked with Missing People, a charity who help the police and help parents publicise missing persons cases. And I can't quote them off the top of my head, but it's really quite a large number. And obviously many children are found very quickly. But also you can go onto the Missing People's website and you can see images and lists of adults and children who are missing and see how long they've been missing for. And it's perhaps different to the impression we might get from the media, who will pick on some specific cases, and a lot of publicity will go into searching for specific children and adults. And that's a whole interesting subject just in itself, I think. And there are some children who go missing more than once as well. If you're interested, I recommend going to have a look at the stats on Missing People's website and look at the work they do.
I will post a link there for you listeners for that. Obviously, you've got these two narratives, as you have in A Little Bird Told Me. How do you incorporate these two narratives? You know, the child's where things are confusing and unknown, and the second where the character has grown up.
I think with All Your Little Lies, I had the adult story first. So I had Annie as an adult, and then I knew what had happened largely to Annie as a child. And as I was writing the adult story, although it's not in her voice. It's quite close to what she's thinking all the time. So when I was writing the backstory, the flashbacks, I was, I guess, both trying to tease but also to inform the adult narrative, to try and round it out a little bit more and give it some perspective.
Well, I would like to look at the narrative a bit further. I found it very interesting that you write in the third person for all your little lies, where you are still delving into Annie's mind quite deeply and looking at her thoughts as if you were writing in the first person. What was your reason for writing in the third person as opposed to the first?
Well, I wrote A Little Bird Told Me in the first person, and it felt really right. And I tried in the third person, and I just kept wandering back into the first person. But one of the things that it makes difficult is for the reader to know what's going on outside of that person's head. So I thought I would try Annie as in the third person, but very close, so that we could feel her anxiety and her emotions and perhaps relate to how she's feeling, but also we could maybe see how she might appear to the other characters in the book. And there was just a little bit more leeway to have some more information in terms of how people reacted to her than I might have been able to convey just having Annie's voice.
Well, on this subject, I loved how you used the secondary characters, particularly the group that Annie joins in her search, and how you use them to show how Annie's comprehension of things work in the real world, beyond how she's thinking of it. How much time did you need, I suppose the word is, need to spend developing these people to make that work?
It does take a bit of time. I think what I did was started with the main characters, and really tried to fine tune what was going on and get the story structure right. And then I was able to look more closely at the supporting characters and their role in the book. They kind of were layered up over the course of putting the story together, and they were probably still really evolving right to the final edits in terms of, I missed a trick on this person, could be involved in this particular way. And I don't know about everybody, but I get quite interested in my secondary characters, and I do know a lot more about them than ends up in the book. There's lots of bits that probably get cut out, lots of explanation and so on.
That is, it's definitely fascinating to hear how you've developed them more than we will read in the book. That itself comes across that there is so much there. On a completely different subject, and it's going to seem strange that I've got this question here maybe than at the last, but hopefully it works. Is Annie going to be able to heal from all this?
Yeah, I'd like to think Annie will be okay, but it's kind of in her hands now.
Definitely. I think I can say this very vaguely without spoiling it. I think it was interesting and very poignant how you decided to end it without giving the details of someone else. You might read the end of the book and go, she didn't tell us about this certain person, who anyone who's read the book probably knows who I'm talking about. If we can talk about it without spoilers, was that a decision that was always in your mind, or had you kind of written an ending where we explore what's probably going to happen a little bit at all?
I had got that ending in my mind, that's how it would come to a close. I think the specific thing that you're referring to just came about when I wrote it. It just felt right, and I noticed it and thought, do I want to do that? And I decided yes, I did. That felt exactly the right way to finish it.
That is very interesting to know as well, definitely. In both books, you look into the ways that young girls relate to each other. You show the firm friendships, and you've also got the bullying there that you explore really well. I'm guessing this is something that's important to you to explore and study in fiction.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, and I find it as well very hopeful that children have to learn how to be around each other in a way that we take as adults for granted. And so children can be unpleasant to each other or can be extremely supportive, and that doesn't have to reflect the adult that they will be growing up, although all of these experiences do then mould who the adult might be. And I think possibly in both books I was thinking about was, the characters have these experiences, and in the books they're quite dramatic, but in real life they're probably not so dramatic. And then when you become an adult, there's a choice to be made about how much we allow those experiences to continue to affect our lives. And sometimes it's not a choice that's obvious that we can see, but we have to somehow find a way through. But yes, I do find that all really interesting.
Moving on a bit, you have a book on the go about a little-known figure.
I do. I'm playing with a little-known female figure from antiquity that we know of as Dido. And there's really very little factual information about her. Or if there is, and anybody's listening, let me know. That would be brilliant. But I was interested in the fact that she travels. She's widowed, and she travels from Tyre, and she founds Carthage. And she's treated in the Aeneid as a woman who falls in love with Aeneas, and when he leaves, she dies of heartbreak or kills herself, and it just doesn't sit right with me. So I thought it might be quite fun to have a look at that story and come up with some things that she might have done, but not that.
That is a departure.
It really is, and I think this has been such a strange year for writing stories, and I had a couple of other plots that were more contemporary, and I was trying to work out whether I adapt them to fit within a pandemic situation or not, and it would be possible. But also, I just feel like writing something joyful and uplifting and fun, and this might end up being a project that's just for me, but we'll see. I think it will take me a little while because it is so different.
That is quite an interesting departure. It'd be interesting to see where it goes. On a completely different subject, I noted that a few years ago you said in an interview that you were trying harder to put down books you don't enjoy. And I'm someone who really struggles with that myself, so I would like to ask, have you been successful?
I have. I still don't put down very many books. I very rarely find a book that I can't enjoy on some level, and I read across all genres, so it is really very rare for me. But I do think it is better to put down the book if you're not enjoying it and move on. It doesn't mean you won't come back to the book later. It might be that the timing is wrong. I find that there are different periods of my life, different types of books appeal more than others. So I have a pile of books that I bought at some point that I haven't yet read, and some of them speak to me and some of them don't. And I think that's fine. I will get to those books that aren't speaking to me right now at some point in the future. And if I don't, that's fine too.
So have you gone back to a number of books that you'd put off?
You know what? I haven't. And I think that's probably a sign in itself, isn't it? That putting them down was the right decision. There are a couple of books that I can think of that I would like to go back to. There's a Maggie O'Farrell book that I can't remember why I put that down. It wasn't really deliberate. It was, I think something happened and then I forgot about it. And then I thought, I'll have to go back to the beginning, and that didn't appeal. So I would like to go back to that. There are probably a few books of that nature where I've just thought, do you know what? I don't fancy reading whatever this is right now.
It's a good way of working through it. I'm not very good with putting books down. I feel like I have to complete them. But I am trying it with films, which is obviously a lot easier because it's a lot shorter.
Ah, yes. Yes, it's a good one, I think, if you can manage it.
So, listeners, A Little Bird Told Me and All Your Little Lies are out now from Agora Books. Links to purchase them are in the description. And look out for Marianne's next book. Keep an eye on it. If you have enjoyed this conversation, do subscribe for future episodes. And as always, if you want to contact me, the email address is in the description. Marianne, this has been really, really cool. I have really enjoyed talking about your books, and, there's just so much more to everything. I would love to go in detail further, possibly bore the pants off everyone with my incessant questioning. And also just talking about books in general. I think I found a kindred spirit in my fiction reading. It's been lovely having you here. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I've enjoyed it so much. You have so many interesting questions. It's been lovely to talk to you.
The next interview will be on Monday, the 25th of January. The Wormhole Podcast, episode 29, was recorded on the 18th of December 2020 and published on the 11th of January 2021. Music and production by Charlie Place.